You're listening to a panel discussion from Resonate Liverpool. In collaboration with Liverpool John Moores University and Melodic Distraction, the panel discussion entitled Drugs, Time to Talk took place at the Jacaranda in Liverpool. You can find out more information on the topics discussed, as well as relevant links to the panellists, at www.melodicdistraction.com. Enjoy.
Cool. Hello, can you hear me? Yes. How's everyone doing today? You good? Yeah? Cool. Thank you for coming, by the way. Just quickly before we start, just a few kind of housekeeping things. Can you make sure your phones are on silent, please, just so we don't disrupt the flow? And if you are going to take photos and stuff, feel free to do that, but can you make sure the flash is off? So thank you very much. And there are two fire exits. So one is the way that you came in, and then the other is by the toilets over there. And if you would like to make a donation on the way out, there is a box on the way out. And we will have about 10-15 minutes for questions at the end. So if you have any questions, just kind of hold on to them and I'll get over to you towards the end. Cool. So welcome to Drugs, Time to Talk, a panel brought to you by Resonate Liverpool in conjunction with Liverpool John Moores University. My name is Jaguar. I'm a DJ and presenter working across Represent Radio, BBC Introducing, and Mixmag. You might have heard of The Lab, which is our weekly office party. I kind of host that, and I'm a writer for Mixmag as well. And I'll introduce you to our panel in just a second, but in the next hour, we're going to be discussing the topic of drug welfare in live events and how this can affect partygoers, venues, emergency services, and kind of how we can cover reduction methods and kind of offer, safe measures of how we can, make sure everyone kind of has a nice time and is safe, basically. And I'm going to introduce you to our panel now. So we've got Andrew Hill to my left. Hello.
Hello.
So he is the founder of Liverpool-based Night Abandoned Silence, which you had last night.
It went very late last night.
Yeah, he's okay. I might have to ease him in, but yeah, he's all good. And the newly appointed promotions and booking manager at Fabric Nightclub in London, which is great.
I think I kind of have to mention that with the Fabric, because naturally it's going to come up, is that I only joined there around 6 months ago, so I wasn't there at the time of the elephant in the room, which I'm sure is going to come up at some point. Just with mainly that I wasn't there when it happened and things, so I can't really talk from first-hand experience, but I've heard and spoke to people there, so I'll be able to contribute. But it's more, basically, I wasn't there when all that was going on, so I can't really talk from first-hand or kind of representing Fabric's opinion on the matter. But kind of the standard disclaimer: these are all my opinions, not Fabric's, etc., and all that.
Yeah, cool, thank you. And then we've got Dr. Jens Thomas in the middle, who is head of testing at The Loop. The Loop, we'll talk about it a bit more in detail, but it's a non-profit organisation which provides drug safety testing across events and festivals and nightclubs. And then over there, we have Dennis Moran, who's a recently retired police officer with 30 years experience at the Merseyside Police. So we've got, a good variety of people here on the panel. So I guess I've introduced myself. Do you guys want to say a little bit more about what you do? Do you want to start, Andrew?
I guess kind of my experience being is I'm quite, basically my life since I was 19, 20 years old has been in nightlife. Like I started the club night while I was at university in Liverpool, I was at John Moores. And that was 8 years ago. And around 2.5 years ago, me and 4 friends opened a venue called the Buyers Club, if any of you guys know that, on Hardman Street. So so promoter, DJ, and I'm a club owner, and now I'm down in London working at Fabric. So I guess I'm across a number of different platforms in nightlife. So the kind of topics we're talking about today affect me on a day-to-day basis, I guess. So I guess that's why I'm here.
Cool. Jens?
Oh yeah. So I guess my day job is a postdoctoral researcher in computational biology, so I'm a kind of scientist by background, but I've been involved with the Loop since before it started, so through a friendship with Fiona.
Sorry, I think this is up for a minute.
Do you want to start that again? Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So so I'm a postdoctoral researcher is my day job, so I'm a researcher at the university, but I've been involved with the Loop actually kind of since before it started, through a friendship with Fiona Measham, who was started it. So for about 5 or 6 years now, we've been involved in testing drugs at nightclubs and festivals and doing harm reduction. So that's kind of my background, but I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Cool. And Dennis.
Hi, I don't know whether this works, yes? Yeah, I'm Dennis Moran. I'm a former sergeant in Merseyside Police. Prior to that, I worked in Panellists for 10 years building ships, and then went labouring, and then I thought that was too tough to do, so I joined the police. And I was there for 30 years. I ended up heading up the drug support unit. So I had people working for me who were drug expert witnesses who would go to Crown Court and give opinion on drugs and drug paraphernalia and various other things. One of my roles was as a controlled drug liaison officer working with the NHS accountable officer. So the post-shipment stuff, investigating doctors and dentists, nurses, which is great from the human side of medication, but I also had responsibility for veterinary medicine as well. So investigating vets and the way in which suppliers and everything like that. I was also a chemical liaison officer, so based on illicit labs and feeding into the NCA regarding suspicious transactions and precursor chemicals. On leaving Merseyside Police, I was offered the opportunity to go and do a master's degree in public health and addictions, which I did stupidly in a year because it absolutely beasted me, but I did it. And I'm lucky enough to have been given the opportunity to be a visiting research fellow at Liverpool John Moores. So that's where I am. However, today, and the caveat says, I don't speak on behalf of John Moores University, I don't speak on behalf of the Home Office, and certainly not Merseyside Police, because I've got no connection with them now. I'm more than willing to try and answer awkward questions. If you've got any awkward questions, don't be afraid to ask them, because I'll either say yes I will or no I won't. And the other caveat is there's certain departments that I've worked in that I will not speak about, and that's just self-protection.
Cool, thank you. So I guess before we get into that nitty-gritty area, Jens, we talked about the Loop. I think we should probably kind of highlight what the Loop is and what you actually do. So do you want to kind of tell us a little bit about the organisation?
Yep, so the Loop is a not-for-profit organisation involved around drugs welfare and harm reduction. So we have kind of two elements to what we do. So one is welfare. So we work at festivals and we run welfare. So looking after people that have maybe struggling with drink or drugs and looking after them. Taking them to the paramedics if necessary, but if they don't require kind of medical attention, then just kind of looking after them and getting them through that so they can go back and enjoy themselves. So that's kind of one element of what we do. The other element that's kind of, I guess, becoming more and more high profile is the drugs testing work that we do. So we've been doing that for a number of years, and we started off with, I guess, what we call back-of-house testing. So we've done that in Manchester at a nightclub there, and we've also done it at festivals around the UK. And it's testing the drugs that are usually handed into the amnesty bin. So if you've been to a club or a nightclub, you'll have seen that they have a kind of bin. If you get to the entrance and you see the dogs, and users are kind of worried about what's going to happen to them, they have the opportunity just to dispose of their drugs in this bin. There are no questions asked. But we then would get those bins, and then we would go through them and analyse them with various scientific techniques to work out what was in the drugs. So that was very interesting for a kind of just a pure research angle to see what drugs are circulating, but also very importantly for a welfare angle. So we can actually, if we notice substances of concern, so particularly strong pills or things that have something that's quite dangerous in, we can actually put out warnings to protect people. So we did that for a number of years, doing back-of-house testing, but last year we introduced front-of-house testing. So this was the first time this has been done in the UK. So this is where we have a facility where users can bring us their drugs, and then we'll then test them to try and determine what's in those drugs, and then feed back the results. But a key part of this, which kind of links into the the sort of the harm reduction and welfare side of the loop is that we don't just tell people what's in their drugs. They actually have a 10-minute intervention with a trained drugs worker. So they'll hand in the sample, they'll go away, they'll come back maybe half an hour later, and then they'll go into a booth with a trained drugs worker. That drugs worker will then explain to them what's in the drugs. They'll explain what the properties of that drugs are and what the dangers are. And it also gives them an opportunity to talk about any issues they may have around drugs. Because one of the key things is a lot of the people that we come into contact with have never had any contact with the drugs professional before. So that they may be concerned about their drug use, they may have all kinds of issues, but this provides us with an opportunity to kind of in a non-judgmental way talk to them and give them that information. So kind of that's, I hope, like a kind of overview of what we're doing in the loop.
Cool, thank you. And you have a crowdfunder page, is that right? For the
yes,
loop?
So we've just launched a crowdfunder, basically because we'd like to roll this service out at more festivals in the UK and kind of make the service more available. But we're a not-for-profit. I don't get paid for work on the loop. I donate my time. It's mostly staffed by volunteers. But it's quite expensive to run because we have some very expensive scientific equipment that we need to support. And there's just infrastructure costs that we have to kind of pay for, even if everyone gives their time. So we're currently in the process of trying to raise money to enable us to buy more equipment and provide the service that we do. So yeah, if anyone is interested, it'd be great if people could kind of support us that way.
Cool, thank you. Okay, so let's get into it. So I guess we can start by focusing on what the main concerns are when it comes to drug welfare amongst young people. Does anyone want to kind of kick us off? Dennis?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll do it.
Right. I take issue with the fact that it's young people. Some of the indications that I've had with some research and enforcement on new psychoactive substances has been that the average age of the user was 47. And they're not young people.
Wow.
So it's right across the board. In 1975, we didn't have a great many people who were OAPs and heroin users. We've got a lot of them now. So it's quite broad. So it's right across society. I don't think we need to look at an individual age group. I think we need to look at the broader spectrum. And it's been moaned about by a lot of people that the mums and dads are going to the festivals with the children and they're piggybacking the children having a good time because they want a good time as well, and they're another generation older than the children, so, and they may or may not take drugs. So as regards welfare, it's right across the board. From a public health perspective, I think maybe event organisers need to look at themselves and go within themselves and say, right, we need to have a public health page telling people about drugs and drug interventions, but also we need to go back to the very beginning when the licence is granted from the councils, and they have to say what they're doing as regards measures to prevent any harms to people. And maybe that's at the very, very early stage of an event where the likes of the Loop need to have a presence. And maybe they've got the funding page, maybe part of the ticket that you pay for funds Loop. Because as an event goer, you want to be safe yourself, and if someone like Loop is present, there's possibility that you're going to have a safer experience. So I don't know whether.
Yeah, no, that's a good starting point. Jens, you're jumping in.
Yeah, so I completely agree. It's kind of the sort of the problems of drugs is across society, and it's not linked to any particular age range. But I'll just speak to the kind of what I have most experience of, which is working at nightclubs and festivals, which is generally a younger demographic. But actually, what we're finding with festivals is, as you say, it goes up to kind of people in their 60s that are still going to festivals and still taking drugs. And so I'd say that there are kind of two main issues as I would see it. So one, which goes more to the younger users, is that they don't really know. There's just a lack of knowledge about what they're taking, what these things do, what's in them, and the effects that they can have, and also the effect of mixing kind of different drugs. So there's a real drugs are dangerous enough as they are. Any individual compound is more than enough to kill you, but when you start getting into polydrug use and you start mixing drugs, and particularly when you start mixing them with alcohol, it's really, really dangerous. And a lot of young people just don't realise that there's kind of not the level of respect they need to have for these substances. And the information that they're getting is kind of, it's out on the internet, which is kind of the Wild West, and they're hearing all kinds of different stuff. And it's very difficult to get kind of reasoned, sensible advice, because it's either, no, don't do this, it's terrible, or it's kind of, you know, these are great, take as many as you can. So it's kind of, it's educating people about drugs and what the dangers are. And then it's also, if you accept that people are going to take drugs, then it's currently a completely unregulated market, so it's run by criminals and gangsters who have their only interest is in making profit. So for that reason, they're not always the most scrupulous and diligent when it comes to making sure their product is safe, and there's all kinds of weird stuff that can go in drugs. And actually what we find recently is that it's that's not so much of a problem. It's often the fact that drugs are too strong that's the issue. But often you get adulterants in drugs that can cause real problems for people. So it's people not knowing what's in the drug. And the other side of that, I would say, is that and this is currently the biggest problem we're seeing, is that drugs are just becoming incredibly powerful. So the amount of MDMA that you're getting in a pill now, kind of when pills came out, it was probably 70 to 100 milligrams. We're now seeing pills that are in the 250 milligram range. That's a massive dose. And if you're kind of a small, slight female, that's getting to the point that you're in real danger. If you double drop 2 of those, that's probably a lethal dose. But obviously, you've no way of knowing that if you just buy a pill. So there's a real danger in people just not knowing what they're taking. So that's kind of part of what we're trying to address.
Do you want to add to that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be. Yeah, Tom, is this? It's going to be quite difficult following these two guys on these topics. But yeah, I think the main things I picked up from that was what Jens said there about it's kind of difficult to word, but it's kind of not condoning that it's going on, but it's kind of accepting that it is going to be going on and kind of working out the educational side of it, so people are aware of the strengths of things and things are getting stronger. And also, I guess with the testing, people know what goes into these things, because naturally, you say it's an unregulated market, so there's literally no way to know what goes into these things unless you ask someone, So I think the testing is really important, so people know what goes into these things that they're taking. And it's kind of like in the whole club scene, it's kind of like an elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about, which is natural because it's illegal and things. But so I think it's just kind of working out, everyone kind of going towards one common goal and working out the welfare and education side of it. So yeah, so everyone can kind of help and make it easier for. Not easier for it to be done, of course, don't mean that, but safer, working out a way to look after people so they're not doing lethal doses like you mentioned there, things like that.
And would you say, I guess, attitudes are changing now towards drug welfare?
I think certainly with things like the Loop coming into Kendall Calling, I think it'd be interesting, this is a question more for Jens, is how receptive festivals things are, because it's a thing where I guess having someone like the Loop out of, sorry, I'm asking you questions now, but coming to it, so I'll take your job for it. But yeah, I think working with festivals, how receptive they are to you, because I think do people find that having the Loop there is almost like these festivals are accepting the drugs are here, which they don't want to tell the wider appearance that we know. Is I think do these festivals want to say if the Loop are here, then we're accepting that drugs are going on at our event. As a promoter, we'd never want to talk. You'd never say that these things are going on, but you might know things are going on. But yeah, how these festivals react when you come to them. Yeah,
so it's interesting. There are. The way we always like to do it is that we're working with reality and with, we're trying to do evidence-based approaches. And if you actually look at the evidence, it's blatantly obvious that people are taking drugs at nightclubs and festivals. And as far as nightclubs and festivals go, their primary concern is they want to keep their event going. They want to do the best they can by their customers. And it's not good for anyone if someone dies. And no matter how strict the policies are, drugs will get into festivals and will get into nightclubs. Drugs get into prison. So you have the most high security environment is riddled with drugs. So drugs are going to get in. So it's you can go into denial and say it's not happening, but it is, and people are dying. So at Kendall Calling we had a tragic, a young kid die from actually I still don't know, we're quite sure what he took, but so they are happening. So for festival owners and nightclub owners, actually that they are quite keen to have us on board, because we can bring an element of safety to the event. Because if we can say we've identified this pill that is extremely strong, or this one, we had issues with pentalone recently, that was drugs that were laced with pentalone. So this is not what you think it is. That's actually a safety measure, and it keeps people safe. So actually the nightclubs and festival owners are very supportive, and actually unfortunately you're tough, but the police are actually probably our biggest supporters. They're really keen to get us in, because again, the police deal with reality. They're on the ground, they know what's going on, they're trying to protect people. So actually it's kind of that there's a lot of support, but it's kind of the political will and people being it's scared of what the perception will be, because for a nightclub or a festival, if they bring us on board, actually they're concerned about their customers, they're trying to do good, but it can be spun as in, oh, you're condoning drug use, which is just not the case, because it's going on anyway. What they're trying to do is harm reduction, they're trying to minimise harm and stop people dying. But it's very easy for that to get spun, and that's the trouble that we see.
Yeah, I think if we can even pause here and just say, like, the fact that we're having this panel and actually talking about it is amazing, and it's important. So I think that could be related to kind of the current policies, the current drug policies that are in place. And my question is for you guys, do you think current policies on illegal drugs will change in the near future? Do you think, there's obviously people always questioning, do you think we should legalize things? Do you think that would help? What are your views on that? Maybe Dennis over there.
Right. Can I just go back one to say about the Misuse of Drugs Act and Section 8? That helps focus the minds of venue owners, because if they allow drugs to be consumed, even if they just turn a blind eye, they can be arrested and charged and put before a court. And there's a stated case, if you want to look it up on the internet, called the Winter Comfort Trial. And that happened because they ignored the fact they were just blind to what was going on. So that does help focus, and the current Misuse of Drugs Act as it is was allegedly created to protect those who can't protect themselves. Now, there may well be some statements made by various people in authority who say that drugs are controlled because of the harm they do. Now, some may argue that that's not evidence-based. Now, last year, I think 2017, the government refocused away from the harm reduction model and went more towards an abstinence model as regards drug policy. That's the push. And whether or not that is evidence-based, they've got to argue out. I don't know whether... I did have quite a good look at it from a police point of view. I was part of the focus group that was looking at the CAT, K-H-A-T, CAT legislation, and the act that brought that CAT under control, and whether or not that was just because and this is a personal opinion, was that because the Americans were looking at the UK saying you're the staging post for CAT coming into America because Heathrow was the focal point, or was it to protect certain elements in the community from drug misuse? I think a lot more research and a lot more evidence-based policy needs to occur, and whether or not that is occurring can be argued out. And there's a lot of quite brilliant academics who've got research, and Jens probably put into that with the stuff that you do, so that it's got to be evidence-based. Now, I don't think currently that the present government and successive governments, because we've seen all three major parties in power recently, whether or not they're looking, or whether they're just accepting drugs in society and just controlling the bits that they want to.
Cool. Yeah, just to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to... so with, again, I think the evidence base is really important. So I mean, we should be working on what the evidence is, and if you look at the evidence in society now, you know, prohibition, the way we're currently policing drugs, really doesn't seem to be working. It's causing so many problems, and giving what is, you know, if you come from the point that you accept that people do take drugs, which you just have to look around you, people do take drugs. If you do that, giving that that kind of market to criminals is really not a good idea. And so much of the problems we see in society are, I would say, due to that. And if you try different approaches, and actually it was in Liverpool that the term harm reduction originated in Liverpool through the needle exchanges that were started just kind of very close to here, and that had an immediate impact on what was going on, because by giving heroin addicts the fresh needles and enable it so they wouldn't have to commit crimes to get their supply, there was a huge reduction in crime, there's a reduction in public health problems. So you can see that changing policy has an impact, and there's an increasing body of evidence now that strong prohibition increases the level of harm that's caused in society. So David Nutt recently published a paper that I think is open access with Fiona, I think, and a few others, exploring different models of kind of policing and regulating drugs. So they looked at 4 kind of different models, from extreme prohibition to basically a free-for-all. And what they found was that actually based on this model, the safest model was kind of government regulation, so not handing drugs over to a free market, but having them available through kind of controlled government suppliers. So that minimised the amount of harm to society. And the thing is, if you add up the amount of money that is spent and lost on through the misuse of drugs, it's enormous, and it funds. So the government's own figures state that drugs fund 1/3 of organised crime. So if but you're giving them the market that's funding organised crime, that's funding human trafficking, all kinds of stuff, because it's a reliable income generator. So the current policy, I don't think, is working if you look at the evidence. So I think as we move towards more kind of evidence-based models, policy will have to change, because the current one I would say, isn't working. And again, I would say, these are my opinions, not necessarily the Loop.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's move more towards kind of venues and drug welfare. Obviously, in recent years, we've seen how this can affect venues with, the temporary closure of Fabric. More recently, Birmingham's Rainbow venues closing due to drug-related incidents. Andrew, you feeling okay? Yeah, he's okay, great. So Andrew, this is kind of more towards you, but how do you think these incidents are affecting kind of venues and the wider nightlife industries?
Certainly from being at, kind of going back on what I said before, being at Fabric for the last 6 months, seeing the reaction to the entrance. I don't know how many people have been to Fabric since it reopened, but the general entry now, it's comparable to going through an airport, basically. You get given a bowl and you put everything into the bowl. You go through, then for 1 hour of every night, everyone has to take the shoes off, regardless if it's a DJ coming in or if it's anyone walking through the door, literally every single person entering the venue. And they have the passport check, with the same thing, they have the Hebes, you have that. So it completely puts off people, not everyone, but a lot of people get put off from going to the venue because of this. So I think with Fabric being one of the biggest clubs in London as well and in the world, it's quite staggering that this kind of stuff going on at the entrance can stop people from wanting to go to it. And there's kind of a lack of consistency across London, because a lot of clubs, even comparable clubs, same size venues, same lineups and things, they just have people checking IDs on the door. I mean, that's only 1 or 2 examples, but just having that kind of difficulty getting into clubs and the amount of things you have to go through really puts people off, and I think it will affect, in the long run, immediately after opening it affected Fabric instantly, and it's kind of coming back on its own 2 feet now, but having to do that kind of put people off from going. I think that's something they have to keep an eye on in the long run, is it's kind of forcing people on the ground to warehouses and things. Certainly I've seen it more down there than up here, but East London, that kind of warehouse scene where it's driving people on the ground to illegal things where drugs are rife and there's no security, and it makes it more difficult, makes it more dangerous compared to these controlled places, which there's kind of a whole tangent to do with the warehouse and things, but it kind of drives people on the ground. It's something to probably to be wary of, basically.
So I just add to that by increasing security on the door, you don't always, and you generally don't stop people taking drugs, they'll just take them before they go in. So what you're seeing is that people will take too many before they go in because they can't carry them, so they take what they've got, and then that's when you have overdoses. So that leads to people dying in the club, even though it's actually, ironically, it's the club security policy that's causing the problem because people are taking them before they go, so that it's the stricter policy is potentially causing death. So, and the club then gets blamed for that, but there's nothing they can do unless they're going to examine the contents of someone's stomach before they walk in.
So do you think there needs to be more of a balance within clubs, kind of in terms of their approach to drugs? Obviously, security is important, but do you think, instead of scaring people off and them taking it in the queue on the way in, Dennis,
Well, I was lucky or unlucky enough to be policing Liverpool city centre in the 80s and
you
early 90s.
You must have seen a lot.
And if you think E's are good now, well, E's were the joy then. But, and I won't name the nightclubs because it's history now. But allegedly, the security on the clubs were the controllers of what went into, in regards to drugs, what went into the clubs and what didn't. And some people made a rich killing on the back of the dealing that went on. There were turf wars, and to some extent they haven't got away. However, that whole thing has changed. It's people aren't as accepting now that drugs are so freely available. And I've got 3 daughters, none of whom take drugs. The eldest in the 30s now, none of whom take drugs that I know of. But they tell me about it and tell me what they've been offered and everything else. And there's actually a kickback, and a lot of their friends are like, well, no, if you take that, I can have a really good time, but without having to supplement my experience with drugs. And there's a certain element that's actually against it. So, and a lot of those are club goers, and yet I agree that the security in clubs can put people off taking drugs in, and then they foolishly take too much. And I think certainly with some of the amphetamines like paramethoxyamphetamine, where there's a late onset, and controlling your body temperature and various things, it can have a really adverse effect. And I think that it goes back to the fact that we need education. We need to educate people about what actually drugs are doing and what's the consequence of taking them. And I don't mean in a lawful consequence. I mean the consequence on yourself. So some people, and I mentioned about people who were in their 60s taking heroin, and they've safely done it for 40, 50 years. Because they've known what they were doing, they're educated, and possibly someone else has educated them how to do it. Well, we need to start the education. I think Australia, some Australian research looked at blocking the internet sites that had drug information on, and they looked at it and said,
websites where you can get drugs, or websites?
No. The websites were like Erowid,
right? Okay.
Where you can actually get information from,
okay.
And pill reports and the likes.
How do you feel about those kind of websites?
Great. They're informative.
It's informing people.
Yeah. They're also, from when I was working in the police, they're also a source of intelligence and information. Because if you go on pill reports, you can actually quack down to almost your neighbourhood and find out what's going on. What pills are there? Because no one ever sells ecstasy anymore. They sell pills, but you don't know what's in the pill, unfortunately. But yeah, the education and the information available should be wider. And we spoke about the elephants in the room. Why do we need discussions like this? Why isn't it out there? Why aren't we freely talking about it? We talk about drink driving, and now there's drug driving, obviously. But the lack of seatbelts. Seatbelt legislation, we spoke about that. There's harm reduction methods. What's the difference?
Yeah. And I guess also I'm kind of thinking, going into the mind of a raver. Okay, I'm in a club and say I've taken something, or a festival, let's say, and then we see a member of the police walking past, and I think from a raver's perspective, you'd be pretty terrified if you walk past a policeman or woman. But to go into the mind of a police officer during these events, kind of what would your main concerns be during these events? What are you thinking? What are you looking out
protection. You swear allegiance to the Queen when you're a police officer. You also, one of the things you say is the protection of life and property. A drug-related death is a very expensive thing for society. Extremely expensive. Expensive for the families involved. Obviously, there's the loss of life. But financially, it's massive. Because you think about all the people and all the organisations that are involved in a drug death, whether it's from the police, the emergency services, the coroner, and all the inquest and everything else that has to happen. That's extremely expensive. And if someone dies, we've all lost, because the human being, and they don't deserve to die. Misadventure, yeah, they shouldn't have done. Maybe, and it's the shoulda squad, isn't it? You should have done this, you should have done that. So, from a policing perspective, certainly the focus would be on organised crime, and we've certainly seen, and a Boomtown has seen a big influx of very, very, very well organised criminals operating in the drug network and coming from all over the place, particularly obviously from London, because it's Winchester based. But that's where the focus of the police is. The other thing that I think people tend to forget with the increase in security and looking and searching, you've got to be mindful that you are going to be surveilled a lot more now. You're going to be searched a lot more, because we've seen music venues the target of terrorism. And the drug side of things is like an add-on. What the police are looking for is terrorists, but they might actually find a drug dealer as a consequence of it. As a drug, and this is where what is too much and what quantities, and you'll never pin me down to what is too much. Because I do know that something like 15 grams of amphetamine is actually a quarter of a kilo in actual fact, because you can bash it down because of the purity. So although someone may have quite a small amount on them, they could still be a drug dealer. So what is too much, if it's deemed by the security and the staff, they'll take it off you. They might buy you from the site or buy you from the club for that night, but that's the consequence. It's a sanction, it's nothing else. They won't prosecute you. That's the likelihood.
Yeah. Okay, so we've kind of covered a lot here, and policies, and kind of from the police angle as well, and kind of moving forwards, like where do you see the future of drug welfare going? Like what, obviously things are changing and things need to change. What would you like to see in the next few years, maybe, Jens?
Well, I guess if we kind of, again, take where we are and within the current sort of legislative framework, I'd like to see more people be able to get access to kind of reliable, non-judgmental information, and also while people are buying their drugs in an illegal, unregulated market, that they can get them tested. So I'd love to see kind of city centre testing, where people could bring their drugs to have them tested, and again receive this intervention so that they can be informed about what they're taking and about what the dangers are, and have the opportunity to talk about any issues they may have around drugs. I think it's quite important to have that. Not kind of we've done testing at nightclubs. And the idea is that you would have people bring their drugs to the nightclub to be tested, but actually that's the wrong time, because people will be that have drunk, they may even take something, that they're not in a position to kind of be rational and think about what they're doing. So this is why the idea of kind of testing during the day, when people are kind of, they're straight, they're clean, you can have a sensible conversation with them. That's kind of useful. And actually, when we do the testing at festivals, we kind of stop at latest 8 o'clock, because beyond that point, the information that you're giving is probably not really going to go in, and it's probably too late anyway. So it's important to kind of, I think that would be a change that I'd really like to see, so that people can get the drugs tested beforehand when they're kind of straight and clear, and we can give them that information. I think that would be a good starting point given the current legislative framework.
Definitely, thank you. Dennis?
Has anyone ever heard of Weddinos? Because currently a UK government, as in the Principality of Wales, allow drug testing. Because if you can't send drugs through the post, it's illegal. However, you've got to get them to Weddinos. And if you go on to the web and type in Weddinos as it's pronounced, you send your drugs to Weddinos, they will test them and they will tell you what they are, but only if you live in Wales.
So you have to be in Wales in order to...
Yeah, you've got to have a Welsh postcode.
I see.
There was, and the drug testing thing, there was argument that the drug dealers of Liverpool and surrounding areas were going to Connors Quay and posting their drugs to Weddinos with a Welsh postcode on it, and then getting the results, so they knew whether the importer or what they were given was actually what they were sold. Now, there's no evidence that actually occurred, but it could do. But that would be a consequence that maybe, some people might argue, would be worth having, because the wider scope is that people are protected. Now, Weddinos have had to back down from testing performance and image enhancing drugs because there were so many being sent to them. And that particular area of drug use is covered in counterfeit and blag drugs. So they've withdrawn that. So if you've got performance in image enhancing drugs, don't bother sending it because it won't be tested. It might be worth when you're on holiday in Rhyl, maybe use your postcode. But it's there. It's a fully accessible drug testing mechanism, and there's some very, very good stuff comes out of there.
Yeah.
So don't say that things don't change or haven't changed in the UK, because certainly the Welsh government had listened to it and said, yeah, we want a drug testing agency in our principality.
Cool. Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of, again, I've gone after these two, which is always difficult, but it's kind of a mix of both their answers. So I think, like, getting the loop more and more involved, I mean, there's potential to make it more centralised, or, I mean, there's probably a question in there whether it would be better to remain independent or to become like a government body. But then I think also just the stigma of drugs, well, like having conversations like this, things like the Welsh Post thing you mentioned there, like having things over time becoming more and more accepted that these conversations can take place, and and it's not forced on the ground, so it's not it's not forced on the ground, that it's not hidden away, so the conversation's taking place and people can discuss openly, and actually that's how it'll get safer and more people get more educated. And I mean, I think that's over time working on that stigma. And I think the main thing we've come out of today that I've learned myself is that things are changing, whereas I think I've felt like everything stands still, because I guess the government, in my head I'm thinking the government got so many other things they're worried about, they're not thinking about this. And I think it's been eye-opening for me hearing from these guys who clearly know a lot more than me about it, kind of hearing that these things are actually taking place and things are moving forward, which is really good. And also that it's not just an independent body taking it upon themselves at the Loop to do it, that the government, and Avery, as you're saying, is in Wales, but like the government and police are doing it as well, which is really important. And I think over time the stigma will lose and it'll go away, and I think it'll get better. Well, hopefully it won't take too long to get to that point anyway.
Fab. Yeah, go for it.
Can I just ask a question? Is anyone in the room against drug testing? So the groundswell is, and this is a cross-section of society. You may well have a vested interest to come in here today, but you would like to see drug testing. I know before you get to ask the questions, it's one from me. And the other thing is, do you think, and then all shout out at once, do you think it should be society-based or just venue-based, as in it should be freely available, as Jens said, in city centres, or should it be just based on venues, and so you've got to be in a particular area before it happens? Any thoughts?
Okay, that's Interesting.
Yeah, I think it makes it quite difficult if it's going to be on the venues, because then it's kind of gets to that point where from their own venues and stuff, they're probably thinking who's paying for it, who's doing it, and also I think that focuses, that makes it about music as well. You know, as in what we're saying about it's complete
but it could be at football matches, or it could be anywhere.
Sorry, that's
so it's events. You know, events where there's a lot of people. So yeah, and I'm not just saying music events, but it could be, you know, when you go into the cinema, you could be drug testing available.
Yeah, why not? Cool.
That's what the film is.
Yeah.
I have seen Star Wars. Yeah.
My final question for you guys, to kind of round off, and a more positive light as well. Kind of, how can we ensure that people are raving safely or going to these events safely when there are drugs about? Just maybe like we've touched on it already, but kind of your one thing that, Andrew, do you want to start as a promoter?
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to be going over ground I've spoke about already. That's the one issue.
Yeah.
I think it is, the testing is probably the best. Do you mean more for raver themselves or more just in general? Because in general, I think, me personally, it's the testing is what I think is the best thing that should go on. But yeah, I kind of feel like I might be repeating myself because I said the same thing about the loop about 5 minutes ago. But I think that's the best way forward. And and getting people to talk about it openly, which again, I'm repeating myself. So maybe
panels like this, conversations like this for sure. Jens.
I guess kind of in a wider way, I think it's being realistic and being compassionate.
Yeah.
So it's being realistic. People do take drugs. People do die from them. And what do we want to do? Well, if we have a compassionate society, we want to minimise that and we want to look after people. So what's the best way we can do that? Regardless of your position on drugs, and whether you think they're the biggest evil in society, whether you think they're the best thing ever, it's kind of, what you want to do is look after people and do that in a kind of, you know, a realistic, compassionate way. So how we do that, I think is kind of irrelevant. As long as we go into it with that kind of intent, then I think it'll come out
cool.
Okay.
And Dennis.
One of your colleagues in Loop, Fiona Measham, said, "Don't think that drug testing is the silver bullet." She didn't. That's not a direct quote, but it isn't the silver bullet. Drug testing alone is one tool that should be in the box, and we need a toolbox approach and be able to present things to people so they can go in the toolbox and pick something out, whether or not that's an education package, whether or not it's drug testing. But that toolbox is public health and personal health to make you safe. There's lots of things as regards drugs and the wider society, and we haven't even touched on violence associated with drug use, which we're seeing in London. Yeah.
I think one thing I just wanted to add is I think there's kind of a general point that, as I was saying about kind of being a stakeholder in the nighttime economy, like as a venue owner and promoting things, I think this week's been quite opening since I accepted the offer to come and do the panel, is that I found myself working from ground zero. I ended up doing research into this, even though I do all these things and I'm in nightlife all the time working in it. I realised I knew so little, so I think educational is a really important thing, and maybe working out a way to get the word out there. So it's not, I think, like you're saying, people don't like talking about it, they're kind of scared to talk about it, and I think getting the conversation going is important. And yeah, educational, because like I was saying, I do all these things, and I had, until this week, I ended up doing research from the ground up into the loop and what Dennis and everyone's been doing, but yeah, I think that's very important.
Fab. All right, I think that will close our panel. Thank you so much. Round of applause for our panellists. This is kind of, we've got like a few minutes for questions and stuff. So does anyone in the audience have any pressing questions about what we've talked about, or anything we didn't cover that you want to, or at the back? Hi. Hello. Oh. Do you need a roaming one? Sorry, we've got a mic.
I'm not really just talking to it. Okay, got it. Thanks. Hello. Do you think that one way of tackling the issue would be to get to the root of the problem and find out why people are taking drugs in the first place, whether that's addiction issues or deeper mental health issues? I think it's kind of naive to think that 200 people in the line to Fabric, all with drugs in their pocket, are just there to take drugs to have fun. I think that a lot of those people will be drug addicts. Do you think that's worth looking into?
Yeah, slightly I think people take drugs because they're mammals. If you look at animals, animals take drugs. Dolphins use pufferfish to get high. So there are cases of kind of, it seems to be quite a, there's almost no society on earth that doesn't use drugs in some way or another. So it's kind of, they seem to be embedded into the fabric of what it is to be human. So that's kind of one side. So I don't think it's realistic to think they're going to go away. But you raise a very interesting point of the kind of dangers. And the fact is, drugs are some of the most powerful modifiers well, they are the most powerful modifiers of consciousness that we know. And because of that, if you're having issues in your life, they are a great way to escape from those. The trouble is when you come back, you've got the same problems, but you've now got all the additional problems that you have of taking drugs. So there are, and then there is just the fact that people become just physically addicted, even if they don't have particular problems. They become addicted to them, and then they end up with all these additional problems. So it's kind of, it's a multifaceted layer. But I think you're right, and it's kind of treating the problem in the right way for the right context. So, you know, if people have an addiction problem, then you're completely right. It's addressing what is the underlying cause, what's the problem, because people don't want to become addicted to drugs and take them in a destructive way. But, you know, conversely, there are people that have been taking drugs recreationally for decades and have absolutely no problem. There are, you know, the city of London probably runs on cocaine. You know, people do it on it's something that does happen, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a problem. But it can be for some people, and they should be treated in a kind of a medical way, maybe.
We've seen MDMA deaths increase over 100% over some time, since 1993 when stats were started, and I think cocaine over 150%. You've got to look at the reasons why. You've got to look at availability and everything else, and you maybe some of the abstinence things, the 12 steps type thing approaches, but you've also got to understand probably everyone here takes alcohol, drinks, but probably, I'm saying probably, none of you are alcoholics. And there's one of the biggest drugs in our society at the moment. Yeah. And with, you know, drugs and tobacco. And there's a big lobby behind both of those substances. There isn't a big lobby behind the other drugs, illicit drugs. But there are, I think, there are gaps in knowledge that we need to fill, and that's going to take time. Don't think that this is going to go away, because I think I've read some reports that they found cannabis in the tombs of Tutankhamun or one of them. So it's been around for a very long time. We know about shaman and various things. So are you going to say that the passage into adulthood for certain societies shouldn't occur because you can't use those drugs? And you know, it's a judgment call. It depends on your society as well. We've got quite a fixed society in the UK, but you know, elsewhere, and we're influenced by right across the globe. You know, we've got full synthetics, and we've got semi-synthetics, and then we've got natural substances, which have been used for millions of years.
Yeah, and just again to add to that, I think again education is a huge factor of that. Instead of making it this taboo topic and not talking about it, and then so people will just blindly, you know, if they fall into drugs, they fall into drugs. They don't really know the dangers necessarily. But if we do say what can happen or how to prevent certain things happening, just enlighten people a bit more, I think you probably would think twice when the decision came down to it to take drugs. Yeah.
Hello? Yeah. I think it's kind of, for fear of answering a question with a question, it's kind of, I mean, looking at it from my point of view, for like a venue promoter side, is there an element of responsibility on the promoter to find out, I mean, as you mentioned, like the 200 people in the queue, should the venue be speaking to these people and finding out where the source of it comes from, or just dealing with, so to speak, the aftermath? And Because an example is Shibuku in Liverpool, like Rich McGuinness, he's worked with Calm campaigning against living miserably, and so they started working on the root of things, which is still going on now, but I remember 5 or 6 years ago they did a really big campaign around it where they were kind of directing people to go there, and it's kind of, that was something really positive that I think will have made a difference in Liverpool, because Shibuku is and was the biggest night here, so I think the fact that they were doing that will have been a huge difference maker, I know, but
Yeah, I guess it wouldn't be the responsibility necessarily of the clubs themselves, but it would affect them. I suppose the question was aimed more at the police and more at kind of drug organisations, but it would be a relaying effect. Looking at these things from a root level would affect those people going into those clubs, I think. So it's just the responsibility of everyone, I guess, maybe you could say.
From a policing perspective, the police can only do what they're told, and that's the drug laws. And it's incumbent on you, as society, members of society, to influence whether you want drug laws changed or when you want things in society to change, because you're the ones who influence it. The police would certainly feed back, and I've been on a number of I've been on the drug standing working group for the police, and it can influence things, but the biggest influence comes from society itself, because you elect your officials.
Cool. Another question? Hi. Yes, this lady with the dark hair. Hi.
So, what would you say is the biggest obstacle to educating people, and how can we help to overcome it?
Biggest obstacle. That's a good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. It's I think it's the fact that it's taboo, really, and it's kind of, it's the fact that you've got there's this kind of polarization between people saying drugs are bad, it doesn't happen, and it's kind of in that kind of, that's kind of the frame we're in now, and it's very difficult then if you're trying to present non-judgmental information. Anything you do that's not towing that particular line, you get pushed into your condoning drug use, which it's not at all. There are lots of people that work in this area that are, it's just not about that. It's about trying to reduce harm and do the right thing. But while you're in that kind of space, and while the Daily Mail exists and can do what it does, and it's very difficult to have reasoned, sort of compassionate, evidence-based discussions about what's going on. So, you know, the evidence that's out there, we mentioned Erowid and places like that, you know, even that they have that kind of slightly nefarious kind of feel about them, and, you know, it's dodgy, and but, you know, it's just information, it's just education. So, well, my personal feeling is that I think is a lot to do, is it's kind of how we are in society and how it's viewed.
Yeah, and I think because a lot of drugs are illegal as well, people, again, they're quick to not want to associate themselves with it, because, again, they can look like they're saying, do drugs, but they're not necessarily saying that. Dennis?
I was fortunate enough to work with local education officers who were drug-focused. And I hate to say this word, but austere times, those posts were withdrawn. Now, I used to meet with them on a quarterly basis, and we used to talk about all the issues, and they worked in schools and further education establishments. That was withdrawn quite simply because they didn't have the cash to support it. We've seen that, and right across the board. Whether or not, as the UK picks up and becomes a richer society again, we see those things coming back. But at the moment, we've actually withdrawn. We've lost a lot of services. Certainly the intervention, the likes of DIP, Drug Interventions Programme, or CGIP as it was, that's been withdrawn to a great extent, and they don't. Drug test on arrest is now completely targeted. It's not a blanket thing. And one of the key things about the drug testing on arrest was the fact that when someone fell off the stool, there was a support worker there, and maybe the life change that put them into a drug addiction state, maybe a certain life change that maybe they want to see their children again, and because they were drug tested and put in front of a drug worker every single time they tested positive, give them an opportunity to change.
Great. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think it's really important to get to the young people because, like, older people are a bit more responsible and they'll probably do the research themselves. But for a young person, you're not as likely to do that.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions in the audience?
Can I just
Yeah,
pick up on that one point?
Sure.
If we don't educate the older people who have children, and home influence is a massive thing. So if they understand and are educated about it, they can influence their children. So we need to look at it holistically.
Would any of you agree with the notion of all drugs being legalized and like therefore regulated, like all just a blanket legalization on all of them?
Because it's so complicated, isn't it? Like, I don't think you could ever really say blindly yes or no to that. And I personally just, I don't know. There's so many ways. If you legalize certain things, then you kind of get to the root of the problem, and you can prevent a lot of. Oh God, I don't even know. I personally would say no, but there's so many buts. There's so many buts.
There's so many buts to it. I think it's it is quite a difficult question. It kind of make it quite. You feel like there'd be an element of anarchy if that happened. To be honest,
Imagine. I mean, let's not
Yeah.
imagine. Let's not imagine.
So, again, speaking personally, so I'm not representing anyone in this, I do actually think everything should be legal because currently if you want to get hold of drugs, effectively people can get hold of drugs anyway. And if you look at the case of Portugal, which I think is an interesting one because in Portugal they decriminalise drugs. And the interesting thing is that if you look at both sides of the argument, it's kind of the people that are pro say everything got better, the people that are anti say everything got worse, which to me basically says not much actually. There certainly wasn't a big swing either way. So increasing that availability, bringing it out from the criminal didn't have a massive effect one way or the other. So this kind of Wild West thing that we're all scared of, I don't think when you've actually look at the evidence again, I don't think you really see that. And to me, it's like there's like making it legal. Again, personally, I'm very, very anti the idea of any form of drug being on the free market. The cannabis legalization in America, I don't think it should be done under a free market because then people have an vested interest in they're making profit out of it. So they want to sell more of this stuff. That's not the right motive. And as Dennis was saying, you have alcohol and tobacco lobbies that are pushing their interests. Are their interests human well-being? No, it's making money. So although I think everything should be illegal and available, I definitely don't think it should be done in the free market. I think it should be done through state-controlled agencies that you go to a place and you can get drugs. And that also, again, gives the opportunity to have an intervention. So if someone is coming in on a daily basis to buy cocaine, and there's, it's a state employee there who's trained in drugs work, and then they can maybe have the conversation is, why are you taking cocaine every day? So I think it's how it's done. And like I said, this paper from David Nutt that was published recently that kind of analysed these different models indicates that if you want to reduce harm, that's probably the way to go. But again, my personal opinion, so yeah.
I've got to take issue with the fact that drugs are legal in Portugal. Drug laws are still there. Portugal will argue that they do have laws which are acceptable to the United Nations and all the United Nations directives. So all drugs aren't legal. It's the state of the possession of the drug. So if you're a drug dealer, you're a drug producer, you may well be subject to criminal investigation. If you're a drug user and you've got, say, less than 10 days supply, you might be free to do whatever you like. We've seen liberalisation of I think it's 5 cannabis plants in certain parts of Europe and Canada where you can actually grow it legally. So there are some societies who are accepting lower levels of enforcement. However, we've got I won't say what I think, but we've got someone like Duarte in the Philippines who is basically murdering his own citizens by enforcing drug laws. And one of the drug policies there, it says, and it's right across the board, right across the government, there's an amendment to it all, and it says this department will do whatever is deemed necessary. That's too wide.
It's very broad.
But that's part of their drug policy in the Philippines. They will do whatever is deemed necessary.
So what does that mean?
Well, anything, doesn't it? It means absolutely anything.
Yeah.
So if it means, I probably can guarantee that every single person who has been shot or is dead as a result of the drugs will have drugs on them by the time they get to the coroner's office. They mightn't have had beforehand, but they certainly will when they get into the morgue.
Ooh, that's very dark. But yeah, is there another question? Hi, we'll get the mic over to you.
Sorry, just with regards to the comment about Portugal, it wasn't saying the legalisation, but it was just an example of where liberalisation doesn't lead to a massive increase. That was.
Don't worry, we're not going to fight.
Hiya. I was asking, my question is, do you think it's a good thing that there's been an increase in people buying drugs off the internet through like the dark web, being is that it's sort of semi-regulated with like a review system, and people are finding out what's in them, like more purity and stuff like that?
Ooh, the big question there is, has anyone in the room ever been on the dark net? Yeah, okay,
Yes.
we've got one,
Okay.
2, 3. It's really, really, really small amount of people who actually use it. So it's very small amounts of society that actually access the dark net. So you might well see reviews. You probably order a hit as well while you're there. Yeah, get someone murdered.
Because can't you get like guns and all sorts?
Well, yeah, it's completely unregulated.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
It's kind of terrifying.
Yeah. But you go onto open source web pages and open source web, and you go into Facebook. You can certainly go onto a drug dealer's page on Facebook. It's there. It's open. It's sort of where do you hide something? You hide something in plain view, don't you? So you don't need to hide because they're already there. You don't need to go to the depths of going on the dark web and using bitcoins and this, that and the other. You can just advertise your wares anyway. And the biggest sort of IT thing that people have is a smartphone, because people broadcast and say, "Get on me now," which means I've got drugs available. And having had the experience of having to go through a phone with 57,000 messages on and pick out the drug speak, and it's all there. You can actually see it being advertised right across the phones. So you don't need the web. You just need BT or O2. There are other telephone providers available.
Vodafone. Jens.
Yeah, I just say from what we see doing the testing and what anecdotally I get from when we speak to kind of the users, it's kind of it does seem that stuff in the dark web, the kind of quality is better, because there is this kind of people can review dealers, and the stuff that people are getting through that seems to be much purer and much stronger. So we're actually seeing that when we're doing the testing, when we ask people where it came from, anecdotally it seems that stuff is more likely to be what it says it is. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing depends on your perspective.
I think yeah, I think that's all we have time for question-wise. But thank you so much for your time. We'll probably be sticking around a little bit anyway, so if you do want to ask other questions, feel free to come over. But thank you so much. Again, a round of applause for yourselves and the panel. Thank you.
Just say it's been emotional.
Yes, it's been a lot.